She was talented then. She's super talented now. And it's the talent combined with a serious work ethic and a lot of hard work and determination. That's what's made her what she is today, a USA Today best-selling romance writer. So you may be wondering, how do you write a great romance? How do you attract a legion of fans like Lauren has? Well, let's hear what she has to say. Lauren, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, what is the single best piece of advice you would offer someone who aspires to write?
My single best piece of advice would be to find out what you want to do with your career. Do you want to write books that you enjoy? Is your goal to make money? Sometimes you can do both. What you're going to want to do is figure out if your goal is to make money and build a career where a lot of people have read your books. Find out something that you like to write and figure out what types of books sell well that you can write and then tailor your game plan toward that. If you just want to write for fun, you still figure out what you like to write. The point is you want to enjoy the entire experience, and then you can figure out whether you want to make it marketable or not, and the decision's up to you, and there's no right or wrong answer. I just think it's important to follow what you genuinely enjoy to do.
Well, that's when you're going to do your best work, isn't it?
Absolutely, when you're passionate, yes.
There's no point in doing something just to chase a trend. That's not going to work out well.
Correct.
Got to write from the heart. Okay, well, tell me what was your process then? How did you figure out what you wanted to do?
Well, that's the funny thing. I write romance now, but I was incredibly averse to romance when I originally started writing.
Really?
Yes, I believed that they were bodice rippers. I believed they were silly. I believed that they were just nonsense fluff. And then one of my friends in law school said, well, you write romance. And I laughed at her and I said, no, I don't. I write high fantasy. And she's like, but there's love stories in there. And I said, no, you're wrong. So she handed me a romance novel, and then everything changed after that because I realized books were amazing. These authors were amazing. And that was where my passion was. So I changed gears.
So this came fairly, what did you read before that?
High fantasy, literary fiction, nonfiction, true crime novels, thrillers.
So is what you're doing now a combination of genres? Or?
Absolutely. And I think it's made me stronger by having no romance background and then transitioning a very complicated reading background into a romance setting. I feel like I have more realistic, fuller plots, richer characters, and better secondary characters and backstories, and a different writing style that feels more literary, which the readers really seem to enjoy.
What was your process? Finding an agent or not? Finding a publisher or not? How did you make all those decisions?
Well, I started the traditional route. I started querying agents with a young adult manuscript before I realized I shouldn't be writing young adult. And then I...
Wait, stop. How did you make that discovery?
I realized I enjoyed writing more adult themes, and I realized my characters were too mature emotionally, not physically, but emotionally. They weren't acting like teenagers, and I realized I didn't identify with teenagers as a crowd, so I thought I probably shouldn't be writing for them if I don't really understand how they think, because it's very important that your characters come off as realistic. So I realized I was an adult writer and started transitioning to adult romance. And then I started querying agents, and then I was able to actually get a first contract actually through a pitch opportunity at a Romance Writers of America group that I belonged to. And the pitch opportunity opened the door to everything else.
It was a writers' conference, basically.
Writers' conference, yes.
But one tiered toward the genre
romance,
you were interested in. So then how'd you find your path to publication?
We got the first contract, and it took me an entire year for my first book to come out. And in that year, I built up a fan base promoting, rough drafts, excerpts, snippets, giveaways, and I promoted my fan base. And then by the time my book came out, I already had people ready to read it. And then from there, I just kept adding to the series. And then I started branching out to other series. And then I realized I liked writing not just historical romance, but contemporary and paranormal. And I kept searching for new ways to publish with different publishers under those different types of subgenres of romance.
That is super cool. Let's talk more about building that fan base. Where were you posting these excerpts? I
was lucky. Facebook was actually starting to just build as far as, prominence back in 2014 when my first book came out. So I created a Facebook fan page. I got graphics going with a graphic designer to promote because I had my cover a year in advance. So I was able to promote the cover and give people something to look at. And then I started posting snippets on Facebook and letting them read up to 5,000 or 1,000 words of my book that was coming out. And then I would ask them to share it to their friends for a chance to win a signed copy when the book came out. I gave away $5 $5 Amazon gift cards, and just kind of started promoting people to talk about my book.
All good ideas. And you're still building that fan base, right?
Absolutely. It's never stopping. But I do a more passive building now, which including first chapter sneak peeks of the next book in the back of my current new releases, and promoting them to sign up to my newsletter, to like my Facebook page. I get them actively engaged in my private Facebook street team, which is like a glorified fan group where they can join, and it's private and they can interact with other people and they get to interact with me. That's the main thing I do, is I give people access to me as the writer, and we talk about my books and my characters, and I tease them with stuff that I haven't written yet, and it's very exciting. I let them vote on covers. I let them vote on what book comes out next or which character.
Nice.
Yeah.
Your fans must love you. What fun.
It is a really wonderful experience to have such an interaction with them, and they become your friends, and it's a supportive group, and it's enjoyable.
Well, let's talk about romance itself. What do you think makes a really good romance novel?
It's emotion and character development. A lot of people think romances are simply books that have sex in them. But I would say if you just want to watch sex, go watch HBO. For romances,
Showtime, I think.
Showtime, HBO.
HBO ditched it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's funny. People have no problem with sex on TV, but they read it in a book and they think it's dirty and they think it's bad. But truth, romance is about two characters overcoming insurmountable odds to be together and to make each other better. So you can have a romance without sex, and the story can be incredibly powerful. Sometimes the sex scenes can enhance the story. It just depends on each story and the characters. But at the end of the day, romance makes you more empathetic. I think the Wall Street Journal had an article about that.
I think all novels do, but yes, go ahead.
Especially because romance novels are one of the few genres that are written in deep point of view. So instead of saying my character felt scared, you say Lily was terrified, her breath caught in her throat, and that instantly pulls your reader in more. And good writers in the romance genre really push that to the next level so that you feel visceral reactions when you read. And most genres don't push that point of view depth the way that romance does.
Well, it's the emotion that's key, isn't it?
Yes, emotion
this is why most aspiring writers, or even sometimes published ones, write sex scenes or something like that.
Yes.
And it's not titillating, it's not exciting, it's kind of boring and mechanical because there's no emotion in it.
Right, exactly. And the best example I can give is there was a young adult author, Rochelle Mead, who wrote a book called Vampire Academy. And it's young adult, so it shouldn't technically have sex scenes in it. She did actually have a scene, but she never described anything graphically. And I found it to be one of the most, and honestly, it was titillating because of the way you felt about the characters. And I thought, that is how you do it. She didn't even have to describe any body parts or anything. And she had you on the edge of your seat with the emotions because these two characters were finally together in the way that they needed to be. And it was unbelievable. And I thought that's true writing right there. Isn't
that what it always seemed to me anyway? And you correct me on this, that when 50 Shades of Grey was all over the news and the bookstores or Target and whatnot, and I'm sure they're still selling well, but people, of course, all focused on the outre sex, for want of a better way of describing it. But it seemed to me, as I read, it's a romance novel. I mean, it's a trilogy, but it's basically one big romance novel with one distinction, but still fundamentally a romance.
Yes, and I think the success about that was the characters and the love story, because it wasn't that he was spanking her. It was that he was a man who swore never to love. He put up all these barriers around himself, and she was someone who was young and innocent and represented everything he didn't think he could have in life. And that is a compelling story, and that is how you should look at romances, is what makes the two characters in their life as they come together compelling, and that's where your story is.
Oh, it's a mutual, right? She had sort of a healing gift that he needed, and he helped her as well. She was sort of shy and awkward right at the beginning.
Her out and got her to achieve her dreams, and
So it's really a Cinderella story.
Right.
Except, as you said, with spanking and whatnot. But still, I mean, that's a universal trope, to use the word people bounce around. That's why Cinderella is appealing. It's it's a regular person you can relate to, but wonderful things happen.
And tropes are wonderful, especially if you can learn to turn them on their head enough or give them a fresh twist. People will always gravitate to tropes, where you have stories like enemies to lovers or Cinderella rags to riches stories. If you can find a fresh way to tell that, you will have an audience ready to read it.
Okay, I got to ask, Do you remember when you first saw your name on the USA Today bestseller list?
I did.
Good feeling?
Yeah, I actually was on a writing retreat cruise with a bunch of other writers.
Oh, perfection.
And it was an indie published, well, it was a book that had been published by another publisher, and then they had closed, and I had self-published it. And then about 6 months after I had re-released it as a self-published novel, it was a year ago from today. It was Labor Day weekend. I promoted it in a certain fashion that was advantageous marketing-wise, and I didn't realize it, but when I was on the cruise a week after that, my editor from my New York house, who didn't really like me all that much because she'd inherited me from another editor.
Oh, yeah, so I've been there too.
Yeah, they don't always like you when they don't pick you. So she emailed me and said, "Congratulations." And I said, "For what?" And she said, "Well, you hit the USA Today list." And I laughed at her. I said, "No, I didn't. That's no." And then she's like, "Get on your Wi-Fi on your cruise and look it up." And sure enough, there it was. And I just remember thinking, this is insane, because I had gotten some terrible news right before that, the day before. I had 3 books with one publisher, and they cut my other 2 books because they decided to trim the line down to 10 authors, and they had 175. So they cut everybody who had multiple books that hadn't been published yet. Turned out to be a good thing. I self-published those 2 books, and they've sold 3 times as many as the first book that's still with that publisher.
Terrific.
But I went from extremely low on a beach to having terrible news from my agent to the next day hitting the USA Today lists.
But you know what? You're giving everybody listening to this a great picture of what it really is to be a writer, what the life is.
It's a huge jump between highs and lows. And even when you think you're at a great point in your career, you have to be ready for that next drop in the wave, so to speak, to use a cruise metaphor. But it happens. You drop and then you rise, and you just weather the storm.
And remember the rise.
Yes.
And keep moving forward.
Yes.
Lauren, thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Lauren, for that terrific interview. In the next podcast, I'll be talking about what writers need to know, do, remember in 2020 to be successful. It's the first podcast of 2020, so that's only natural. I'll also be announcing the next book in the Red Sneaker Writers book series, which should be available for pre-order by the time the podcast comes out. Until next time, keep writing. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit.